I'm Daniel Benjamin. I'm the president of the Academy. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us for tonight's lecture, which will be delivered by Professor Albert Hofman, who is this semester's Bayer Fellow in Health and Biotech. Now, we are taught from an early age that comparisons, are invidious, that we shouldn't do that too often because reflects badly on ourselves and everyone else. But I have to say that I think all the other fellows at the Academy this semester should take note that I think it's actually a non-native speaker and a scientist who gave us the best title of the semester. Because it's a great one. Why are epidemiologists so bad at epidemics? Anyway, we will come back to Bert in just a second. As you may know, the Bayer Fellowship in Health and Biotech is one of the newest additions to the Academy's roster of fellowships. It began in 2021, and the timing was excellent since public health was very much, all across the newspapers every day. And I think that it's been a great contribution to the discussion across the Atlantic. And I think we all recognize just how vitally important this area is and how much it demands the attention of not just specialists, but thoughtful individuals and ordinary citizens. And so I want to take this opportunity to thank Bayer AG and especially our very good friend Oliver Renner. In fact, I would argue that the Academy has no better friend than Oliver Renner, and we're delighted about that. Oliver's here tonight, and I want to thank him for being a great champion of this program and Bayer for supporting this fellowship and making tonight possible. Bayer has been a supporter of the Academy for about 20 years, and we're glad they're sticking around. Our Bayer Fellows, we've had a great roster. Howard Koh was the inaugural Bayer Fellow. He's a professor at the Chan School of Public Health. And we had Harvey Feinberg, who had been the dean of the Chan School of Public Health. And tonight we have Albert Hofman, who just happens to be professor of epidemiology and chairman of the Department of Public Health at the Chan School of Public Health. So we're really doing a great job on diversity in this particular corner of the Academy, and we're going to keep working at that. So I want to give a warm welcome. I feel like a good part of the German medical establishment is here tonight, and I just want to say how thrilled I am that you have joined us, and I want to extend a warm welcome as well to Bert's wife, Maita Suarez, and his daughters, Carmela and Flora Anna, who are in tonight from Holland. And we always are especially pleased when fellows' family travel from afar, because it tells us that they actually think the Academy is something special. That's great. It was an honor tonight to welcome Federal Minister of Health, Professor Dr. Karl Lauterbach, who unfortunately had to rush off to go see his boss, the Chancellor. But it was wonderful that he joined us tonight, and he gave terrific remarks in honor of Bert. Now, I think I mentioned Bert's current place of employment and what he does there. He's also chaired the Department of Epidemiology at the Erasmus University Medical School, and he served as science director of the Netherlands Institute for Health Sciences before leaving for the Chan School in 2016, where he had done a research fellowship after receiving his medical degree from the University of Groningen. Have I pronounced that correctly? Thank you. He is an expert in the epidemiology of common neurologic and vascular diseases, especially dementia and stroke. And he is renowned for having led two enormous cohort studies in the city of Rotterdam on the role of vascular factors in the etiology of Alzheimer's. Now, the next thing I'm going to tell you I've looked at several times, and I still find it hard to wrap my mind around. Albert has been author or co-author of over 2,000 publications. Is that a real number? How does that happen? Are you meeting your daughters for the first time tonight? And they have appeared in such journals as the New England Journal of Medicine, Nature, and the European Journal of Epidemiology, which he is editor-in-chief of, so that may help explain how he gets those things in print. Bert is a member of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, and he received the Volksam Prize in Epidemiological Research of the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. And this was another thing that caught me, Bert. You have a knighthood? I didn't know the Netherlands had knighthoods. Does that mean you could be an earl sometime soon? Well, all I can say is if you get a castle, you have to invite us. Anyway, while he is in Berlin, Bert is working closely with the Federal Ministry of Health, and he is consulting on establishing an institution for prevention in medicine, and that will launch on January 1st. Okay, to return, he's about to tell us why epidemiologists are so bad at epidemics. Bert will speak for about 35 minutes. That will be followed by a Q&A. If you are joining us by Zoom, please type your questions in the Q&A part of the platform. Sir Bert, the podium is yours.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you very, very much for these kind words. I would like to already express my gratitude to both the American Academy in Berlin, this splendid environment, and to Bayer AG. We visited this morning and was very impressed. Thank you very, very much. Also, thank you very much for having me speak about my favorite topic, epidemiology. And thank you for mentioning the title, although the title will come back only a bit later in the talk. I will basically first address why do we do epidemiology. Epidemiology, of course, you follow is the study of occurrence of disease, any disease, not only infectious diseases, any disease, occurrence of disease, frequency of disease. It's the quantitation in medicine. But why do we do that? What are the uses of it? And for the uses, I would like to go back to this person. 4th century BCE, Hippocrates, of course, this bust was found 3 centuries CE, so 700 years later, so I'm not absolutely sure how whether Hippocrates looked like this bust, but in any case, Hippocrates, many of you know, of course, the oath of Hippocrates, primum non nocere, first do no harm. Another very important reason why we think of this very much as the the school of Hippocrates, of course, of the start of Western medicine, is that for the first time the idea of disease linked to causes was conceptualized, not just thrown over by the gods, polytheism in Greece, not thrown over by the gods, no specific relation with causes. And in one of the most important books in the corpus of Hippocrates and his school is called Airs, Waters and Places. And you get immediately that the environment in this case is very, very important. Now, for us, our purposes here, it's important that Hippocrates and his school formulated and wrote about the 4 eternal questions of medicine, the 4 eternal questions that our patients ask us. Namely, doctor, what do I have? Diagnosis. Why do I have it? Etiology, causes. Where do I go, doctor? Prognosis. And can you help me? Treatment. These are the 4 major eternal questions in our field, in the whole of medicine. I translated those questions into what I refer to as the uses of Hippocratic epidemiology in diagnosis brings us to the big picture of mortality and morbidity, of diseases and mortality and death. Etiology is the study of causes. In fact, that is big way. Causes is what most epidemiologists deal with, specific causes of disease. And then, in this era, particularly prediction, very important in AI, machine learning, and finally, action. Action in the terms of Hippocrates is treatment, but in terms of overall medicine, it is both prevention and treatment, intervention in the broad sense. And I will discuss with you these 4 uses relatively briefly, and then come back again to my title, namely talking about the big picture. Why are epidemiologists so bad at epidemics? The big picture, therefore, first. I show you now, I get nearly nostalgic about it already, 2 of my favorite slides. They are 20 years old. I look at them not every day, that's an overstatement, but I look at them very often. This is life expectancy at birth in record countries, presented by 2 major demographers, epidemiologists, and it's very, very important that they were German and American, working in the Max Planck Institute in Rostock. They produced this in Rostock, in this country. And what it shows here, basically, is that when we have the first records, this is just before 1600, first records are from France. The Brits don't believe this, but they're from France. And then here, record countries, generally Britain, and so on. But life expectancy at birth is about 35 years of age until 1800. And then a remarkable thing happens. This slope that goes up, I kept the original slide, but if you would now go further to 2021 or so, you see that it still goes on straight up till the record country now. Women in Japan live on average, average life expectancy at birth, 91 years. In 2 centuries, from 35 to 90 years of age. I propose for your consideration that this is the most remarkable thing that has ever happened to our species, the Homo sapiens sapiens. It's impossible, I think, to think of something that is more remarkable, okay? 35 to 90. If you look in a bit more detail, well, first of all, the slope of this line is 0.25, progression line, 0.25, meaning every 4 years, there's 1 year increase in life expectancy. I summarize this for myself. You live a week and you gain a weekend. And this is still going on. Still going on. Yeah. A bit more in detail here. This is from 1840 to 2000 in this case. You see a few things. Red is women, blue is men. You see here a moment of exception. Decline in life expectancy. In record countries, huh? What is this? I heard both the good and the end. It is indeed the H1N1 influenza epidemic of 1918-19, the so-called Spanish flu, which killed, according to most reliable estimate, about 60 million people worldwide, and the 2 European civil wars, or the 2 world wars, a bit in the 30 years, killed about 45 million. In that comparison, you have to think. That's one moment of exception, both men and women. Here is another moment of exception. They're in men, and this is heart attacks, myocardial infarctions. In the 50s, 60s, 70s of the last century, there was a very big increase of middle-aged, generally men, who got heart attacks and died from it. But there also, it got on track again. Okay. Slope, living a week and gaining a weekend. You see, this difference between men and women now is standard in nearly all countries. 5 years average longer longer live by women. Perhaps not always the case. If you look here, it was not the case. So why that is? So remember, 2 moments of exception. I come back to this slide. This is one of the 2 really big picture slides. There's another big picture slide, although in many senses, of course, less impressive. This is dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and it's the prevalence. How many people do you find if you go into a population? In this case, we went into the population of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and this is not necessarily the best study, but I know it best, and it was one of the first actually to look at this. And you see then, if you make it to 95, and many of us will, because on average, in Japan, women live up till 90 on average, there you have a probability of 1 in 2 to suffer from dementia. And this is not a questionnaire diagnosis, this is a serious clinical diagnosis with imaging and everything you can do about it. It's about 45% or so. Very, very big issue, big picture as well. Okay, we go from big picture to causes. And now I have to ask, I think, our president here to give me my slides, because I think you took... I think that does not happen very often, but I thank you very much. Yeah, I know if you knew them. It is very good that he checked with me. Yeah. Dan, is it still allowed that I speak about this all? You looked at them and yeah, very good. I'm sound. And well, safe, I'm not sure, but sound, yes. Okay. Yeah. We go to causes. And I would like to say two things first about causes in a method sense, how we did methods in studying causes, one of the really main things that we do in epidemiology. I first also want to make a claim. People very often say, well, you study associations. You study a correlation between a possible cause and a disease, associations. No. We study causes. In fact, my claim is epidemiology is the only field that can study causes in the intact human being. Not in cell lines, not in vitro, in the intact human beings. Intact live human beings. Pathology does it in death human beings, but that's generally a bit too late, although you learn a lot from that as well. Causes, what did we do studying causes? We went, over the past 75, 80 years, from description, how big is the problem, what do we have? Well, we started in epidemiology in around the 17th century, mid-17th century, to analysis, to finding causes, very specific causes. And we call this type of movement causal inference. We look at ways on how to study causes. And there are 3 lines that I have taken here. First is a very, very important moment, namely that we have the first randomized controlled trial. We didn't celebrate it last year as a field, remarkably enough, 75 years old. Austin Bradford Hill, British Medical Journal, streptomycin and pulmonary tuberculosis, randomized, one group randomly, streptomycin, other group placebo. Beautiful design for all kinds of reasons. So study efficacy of drugs, or efficacy of treatment. It's not good for other things, generally, but for this it is wonderful. Then, second, big contribution, counterfactual prediction. I'm not going into the details there, but it basically is a way to do the same things as you do causally in a randomized trial, to do it in observational data, where you have not randomized, but just observed nature. Okay? Counterfactual prediction is basically asking the question, what if? What if we would have randomized? If this would happen, yes or no, what would be the outcome? And then thirdly, most recently, borrowed to a certain degree from economics, and there's a very strong link between econometrics and other social sciences and epidemiology, actually, the use of instrumental variables to study causes. What is an instrumental variable? It's a variable that is related to both the possible cause that you study and the outcome, the disease in our case. And this has become very popular since we have genomic data. The genomic revolution has come about since 1953, Watson and Crick and the double helix. The whole development of genomics has brought us at the end of the last century to big way studying in detail the genomic framework of individuals. And we can use then genes or combined genes in terms of a possible instrumental variable, and we call this Mendelian randomization. And the idea is as follows. Say you have a biomarker in your blood, and you think, is that you know it's related to, say, heart disease, say reactive protein or so, whatever, and it's related to heart disease. The question is now, is that relationship causal? That's a key question. It's a key question. We cannot say, like Bertrand Russell, causes are too difficult, let's forget about it. We do not have that luxury in medicine because we have to know it's causal, otherwise we can do things about it. So you study this in relation to this. If there's now a gene that codes for this biomarker, then it's of course very strongly related to the biomarker. If that gene is not related to the outcome, it's not causal. That's the basic overall reasoning of an instrumental variable and of Mendelian randomization. Very, very important contribution, and many papers that we receive. You mentioned the European Journal of Epidemiology. I think of the 2,000 papers we receive every year, it must be 500 now using the Mendelian randomization technique. Okay, I come back to this. I showed you this slide. This is because, indeed, this is my topic of substantive research, and if you see a thing like this and you talk about causes, it's a very natural, of course, to think, why is this actually? Why is this increase happening? Why do we see this strong increase of dementia with age? I know a little bit of the answer. I know also what is the answer not. What is not the answer is proper English, I guess. The answer is not aging. This is not a consequence of aging. If you want to further discuss this with me or you don't believe this, take it up in the Q&A session, okay? I'm not going to go into this now, but this is not a matter of aging. This is a matter of, perhaps, this is a slide you can use for any disease, genes, the environment, and most importantly, generally, interaction between the two. This brings me to a little intermezzo, because you may wonder, why would you study genes if you're concerned with populations? In individuals, yes, we understand gene therapy. It's getting underway. It's getting big way underway, actually, I may say. It's very, very hopeful. But in populations, to genes in populations, why would you study that? It was because we didn't want to make the same mistake as happened in the end of the 19th century, when Robert Koch, here, Charité, Berlin, and this is Robert Koch actually, and Max von Pettenkofer in Munich had a big battle on what are the causes of cholera. Koch in the lab won. This is the Vibrio coma, the bacterium. He isolated the first one. Pettenkofer said, yeah, that may be important, but there are many other things that are important as well. And he lost. And from then on, after 1890 or so, before that, epidemiology, you found it everywhere in the major medical journals, the New England, the Lancet, etc. It disappears, epidemiology, for 50 years. Because the lab took over. And so at the end of the last century, that is to say the 20th century, we thought, let's not make that mistake again. We want to stick, as epidemiologists, close to the lab and not behave as the hygienists. Although the hygienist, Max von Pettenkofer, was one of the most celebrated scientists in his time. One of the Institutes of Public Health, which is quite reputed actually in the Johns Hopkins University, was modeled after the institute that Pettenkofer set up in Munich. Also, he was on the frontispiece, on the edifice of the London School of Hygiene. Here is Pettenkofer, together with all very important scientists in the world of that time. At the same time, by the way, when also Florence Nightingale, you probably have, some of you have heard of Pettenkofer, but I think many more of you have heard of the lady with the lamp, Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale was not on the London School of Hygiene, the prime school of public health in Europe, as they say, and rightly so actually. Nightingale is not there. And the official, I did a sabbatical at the London School, the official reason for that was that, it just has the number of letters. Pettenkofer, count the number of letters, and you see it is possible to put it on there. Nightingale, just too long. Official reasoning for about 30 years from the London School of Hygiene, until a smart PhD student started to count. And you know what happened, of course. And so they had to remedy this. And then I took this photo myself, and Carmela made a slide of it. Here you see, this is the original. Seidenham, wonderful, Pringle and Lind, of course, also. Here is now brought in a bit on the higher level, Nightingale. They had also forgotten, amazingly, by the way, 2 Nobel Prizes for Marie Curie. They remedied that as well. So great institution, London School of Hygiene, and now fully in the 21st century as well. Let's go back to the genes. How do we study genes? Well, in Alzheimer's disease, as an example, first you look at family history. If it looks in your first degree family member or second degree family member, you have more cases of Alzheimer's disease, your risk is yourself bigger. In the case of Alzheimer's disease, it's about 3 to 4 times. Then there was a very important epidemiologic observations in children with Down syndrome. Trisomy 21, 3 chromosomes of 21. Namely, when they died young and were compared to other children who not with Down syndrome but died young as well, the plaques and tangles of Alzheimer, the plaques and tangles in the brain related to Alzheimer's disease were much more frequent in Down syndrome. So that led, in a molecular family study, John Hardy and colleagues, to look on chromosome 21, and they found the first major gene for Alzheimer's disease, APP, amyloid precursor protein gene. It's a missense mutation, as you see there. And very, very important contribution. 30 years ago now, a bit further than 30 years ago, 2 other major genes were found. Very, very important. We thought very important also in terms of mechanism, what is the pathway. But these 3 major genes account together for less than 0.5%, less than 1 in 200 of Alzheimer cases and dementia cases. Okay? Now then, we got to the modern way of studying genes. This is so-called genome-wide association studies. You compare large groups of patients with large groups of control subjects, and you measure everything in their genetic variants. And then you find this, what we call the Manhattan plot. And here now we have 38 genes related to Alzheimer's disease and dementia. But even they, all put together, cannot explain very much more than perhaps 20-25%, if I may say it in those words. This is very crude what I say now, of the disease itself. There must be many other factors, and there must in particular be interactions. That brings me to my second of the 3 intermezzi that I have for you, namely, was Kraepelin right? This is Emil Kraepelin, a towering scientist in neuroscientist, nervenarzt, as they would say then, and still again. First working in Russia, then working in Heidelberg, and then working in Munich. He came to Munich because his predecessor in psychiatry, Professor von Boden, died together with Ludwig II, Ludwig the Mad Ludwig, King of Bavaria, Neuschwanstein and so on, died in the Starnberger See, and so they needed a new psychiatrist in Munich, and they elected, it's true, they elected to have Emil Kraepelin. Here they said this is a who is who in science in around 1908 or so in the world, and this is in the Starnberger See, near the Starnberger See, near Munich, where King Ludwig II died. This is Alzheimer, this is Kraepelin, the founder of also the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that we all use now in people in psychiatry use this, but also the founder of biological psychiatry and a very strong enemy of Sigmund Freud. You can imagine why that is the case. Okay? Now, here we have, this is Gaup, a person who worked very much in various areas of schizophrenia, and this is Niesel, this is a basic scientist. So the combination of this all is wonderful. And Kraepelin was the boss of Alzheimer because Alzheimer went with him into Munich. And Kraepelin writes in his memoirs, I do not know when, it's in German, I don't know when because it's not dated. I have a colleague, Alois Alzheimer, he has found wonderful things in the brain of patients, these plaques and amyloid plaques and protein tangles in the brain. It's really wonderful. It's a very important observation. But, Kraepelin writes, as an apodictic German professor, I'm hoping not insulting anyone right now, but so, he writes, we all know that the vast majority of demens is the consequence of arteriolosclerosis, small vessel disease, we would say now. Arteriolosclerosis, it's vessel disease, rather than either genes or rather than plaques and tangles and so on. So my question was Kraepelin right? And you already predict that I say, yes, he was right. This is one of your major blood vessels. This is a very small limitation of the lumen. You see here an atherosclerotic plaque here. A clinical neurologist wouldn't even worry for a moment about this. You have to have a 20% left, and this is much too much. But this is very strongly related, predictive of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. If you combine it with other vascular factors, circulatory factors, the upper 25% quartile, upper 25% has about 4, perhaps even more than times the risk of Alzheimer's disease and dementia as compared to those with a very low vascular score. It's a very strong predictor, a very strong, in my view, causal predictor of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. This is how we go about causes. I just gave you the example here of Alzheimer's disease. So we have genes, yes. We have other factors, vascular factors, and there are other factors still as well. I'm not going to go into those. That is how we address most of the diseases that we study in epidemiology. Then I bring you to prediction. 3 topics in that, in principle. I would like to discuss for you for a moment cohorts. This is, of course, the time of big data, more and more important than ever. And we, of course, are in the era of machine learning and artificial intelligence. These are all very much linked, and it's all a matter of data, hopefully generally a matter of good data. Prediction in itself, of course, is not causal, or not necessarily causal. And one of the big research questions is how you can predict AI to this causal inference, to how you can make causes out of prediction in the sense of artificial intelligence. Okay? Now, I want to say something about cohorts because they are so important in our field, not only in epidemiology but in medicine at large. In fact, we have learned most, I think, of the diseases we know from cohort. And again, I go back to Germany. A bit more than a century ago, in 1913, Wilhelm Weinberg was an internist, a general internist in Stuttgart, did a study, first population-based study, cohort study. He studied the children of patients with tuberculosis, and he made very convincingly clear that, of course, those children had more tuberculosis as well. This is, as far as I know, the first population-based study. I've looked quite a bit to try to find out. There are all the clinical studies of patient groups, but this is the first one in a population, Germany, just before 1913, before the disasters started of the Second 30 Years' War. So we have here this cohort. There are two big archetypes. One is what we refer to as the Framingham study, a study in which you have very detailed data, very, very good detailed data on a relatively limited number of people. 5,000 is very small, actually, in our type of work. Now, the British doctor study, here, Austin Bradford Hill, I mentioned him already, was one of the investigators and instigators of this study, studied smoking habits among British doctors. Simply asked the question, do you smoke, yes or no, and if yes, how much? 40,000. And then followed what happened to them in terms of lung cancer. There was a very, very strong relationship. Those who smoked, 10 times the risk of lung cancer. Those who smoked heavily, 25 times the risk of lung cancer. This is one of the celebrated cases of findings in epidemiology. So we have big data in extensive studies, and we have large, not so big, but a good question. And we have the combination. I only know of one combination. This is the German national cohort, NACO, in this country. About 10 years ago started among 200,000 people, which has really excellent and extensive data as well. There is no other study in my both view and also my opinion that has the quality of the data in this sense. And one of the important principal investigators of this study is here right now, and you can, Annette Pitts, and you can be really very proud of this study, I think, and we will hear a lot of this from that. Okay, let's go to action. Action, of course, comes into prevention and treatment. I'm not going to say very much about it, except to ask myself, how much do we have to do this from the point of view of epidemiology? And I oscillate generally between two views, namely that of Peter Schrabanek, a person who fled from, at that time, Czechoslovakia to Dublin. It is not, he said, he wrote, not the business of medicine to make people virtuous, but to save them from the consequences of their vices. It rings a bell sometimes. But then also, there was this one. And I took this from a book of one of my heroes, my superhero actually, Jeffrey Rose, Strategy of Preventive Medicine. And his motto, the mantra of the book, was taken from Fyodor Dostoevsky, when the great inquisitor in the Brothers Karamazov asks, are we not all responsible for all? As I said, I leave it to you where you want to stay. I go up and down a little bit, depending also on the time of question. I'm not going to go further talking about action, because I want to go back to the big picture. And then I go back also to my title. Here, oh Lord, here you saw this already. There were two moments of exception, I said. H1N1, influenza, heart attacks. But we got it on track again quite well. This is in the US. In the US, the third moment of exception. This is from a paper that was submitted to the American Senate. This is a senatorial hearing by Ann Case and Angus Deaton. Angus Deaton, they both in Princeton, but Angus Deaton is Nobel Prize winner in economics. And they observed for the first time this in all decline in terms of mortality, so therefore increase in life expectancy in France and in Germany and the UK and Yuan, not in this group, white, non-Hispanic males, say whites basically, in the US. There is an increase in mortality. It starts somewhere around 1996, 7, 8, and it particularly picks up in the beginning of this century. This, of course, you realize, is the opioid crisis, the opioid epidemic. I took this from the New York Times, and you see here, there are all kinds of parts of that. The current major one, and still certainly now the major one, is fentanyl and other opioids, but there was a moment, of course, that we had the legal opioids, the oxycodone opioids. There's methamphetamine in there, there's cocaine, there's heroin in there. In any case, this is what you see when you look at the total number of drug overdose death. 70,000, 2019. I only have it for these recent years. 94,000, 2020. 108,000, 2021. 120,000, 2022. And the number I received from the person I work with at the CDC on the National Health Statistics, Elizabeth Arias, its expected number is 128, perhaps even a bit larger in 2023. These data are not official yet. Now you may say 3 million Americans die every year, so what is it? 128. But you also have to realize that we worry about gun death, don't we, in the US? There are 50,000 gun deaths every year. 50,000. Less than this here. And of these gun deaths, 2/3 are suicide. Very interesting observation. 2/3 are suicide. Suicide rates in the US and in Germany are about the same, except the way it's done is very different between Germany and the US. Okay? But I give this 50,000 to give it into perspective with this. At the top of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, 25,000, the top year, 25,000 people died of AIDS because we did not have antiretrovirals yet. This is 1995 year, 25,000 as compared to this. Now you may say this is not very much as compared to the pandemic death. Yes, the US has not a very good record, if I may say it mildly, in the COVID-19 pandemic, with a 1.4 million probably expected death. But the 1.4 million number of deaths translates approximately into 3 million years lost. 3 million years lost. This is among young people or middle-aged people. The average age of someone dying with opioid is, I believe it's 39. That means that in principle there are 40 years or so for each individual left. 40 times 120,000, and you can calculate yourself what this every year does in terms of number of years. It's each year bigger than actually the number of years left in the opioid crisis. So, point here is that it was starting this in, say, early 2000, or perhaps even a bit earlier, 1997. It was not picked up by epidemiologists. It was picked up by economists, yes. Okay, Nobel Prize winner, but okay, economists. And it was only 15, even in that case, 15 years after it started. You would think it's a failure in epidemiology, at least I think it is. Further big picture failures, lung cancer. A very celebrated case in epidemiology, but the lung cancer epidemic of the 20th century, which was really big, related to smoking, started at the beginning of the 20th century. When did we have the first firm observation on the causes? 1952, when the Dolan Hill cohort study started. It was 50 years in the making. Not a great record. We currently are in this epidemic. You realize that, obesity related then to diabetes mellitus. We have seen it now, we know it now, very late in observing this. I'll show you now for a moment what happened through declines. So when things go better, do we pick it up early? Well, here is the decline in heart disease. This is why there is such a large increase in life expectancy in the 20th century. Because the increase in all categories, basically, where I take this one, this is US, in heart disease mortality goes up till, 1960, and then starts to go down really dramatically. This is only until 1975, because Jerry Stamler gave it then, but it really goes down dramatically. This is largely the explanation why we have an increase in life expectancy. People don't die from heart attacks anymore. We only picked this up as epidemiologists in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, at least 20 years after this decline had started. Not a very good record in this one. Then this, Alzheimer's disease. We wanted to study, on the basis of the Rotterdam study, but also on the basis of other cohorts, what was the trend in the incidence, the number of new cases. That's the real mortality or morbidity. If it's death, it's mortality. Incidence of the new cases of dementia and Alzheimer's disease, because that tells you something about the possible causes that operate. And we did it in the Alzheimer Cohorts Consortium, which has 9 of these cohorts. And unfortunate thing, it's only cohorts in North America and Western Europe. There are no other cohorts. And it was over a period of about 30 years. And we observed in these 30 years, if you put it all together, a 15 to 20% decline in the number of new cases of Alzheimer's disease and dementia in the past 3 decades, over the past 30 years. This was published a few years ago now, so we were even there, 25 years after that we could have possibly have observed this. We may also discuss why this is, actually, a bit later. Then, COVID pandemic. How did epidemiologists do there? Well, the jury is, I think, still out. What our task is of course, to look at frequency and to look at modeling the spread of the virus in this particular case. In terms of other contributions, finding possible treatments. And of course, in vaccinology, epidemiology has done a marvelous job, I think, particularly also in the treatment. Very early picked it up. But here, depending on where the data were available, yes, but generally, in my view, not so well. This is not my field of study, so I have to be modest in this, but I think we did not really very well in this, particularly not in the US, and we may learn from that and what we need to do in the next time. Now this all these, may I say, failures in epidemiology goes a bit against what one of my predecessors, in fact a very celebrated predecessor, John Gordon, wrote in 1942, epidemiology is the diagnostic discipline of mass disease. Right? It's the first big picture, diagnosis of mass disease. Why are we doing so poorly in that? I get you to my last slides now. First, we went from description to analysis. Now, I'm not arguing with that. It is wonderful what we do as epidemiologists and in medicine at large in finding causes. We are really, I think, getting better and better and better, and we have been very successful in many important fields, and it's to a large degree the increase in life expectancy has to do with that. But we forgot about description. How big is the problem? We left that alone. We left that basically, not alone, we left it. Yeah. There is no focus, therefore, on the diagnosis of mass disease. We don't do that. Period. The focus is, and I try to explain this for myself, but the focus is very much on the abstract knowledge, independent of time and place. And a cause is this. Is smoking cause lung cancer? Is an abstract type of observation, rather than a particularistic observation. What is the situation in the here and now? We focus very much on the first and not on the second. Then we have a very strong, particularly in the US, a bit less, thank God, in Europe, but particularly in the US, we have a very strong separation between clinical and community medicine. When I talk to my colleagues on both sides, on the opioid epidemic, they knew in detail their own field. in each side, clinically as well as in public health. But they did not crosstalk. There was no combination between the two, and therefore we are in the disaster where we're in, I think, to a certain degree. And then finally, because there is no link, there's also actually a lack of subject matter knowledge in particular areas. That brings us to my first of all, my question and then my brief summary. First, do we need a new emphasis in our education? Well, a new emphasis, we currently, at Harvard, for example, we have, I think, the biggest program in the US and probably thereby worldwide in teaching programs, a number of courses. Of the hundreds of courses, we only have half a course in descriptive epidemiology. Very, very remarkable. I can blame myself for that, I'm responsible. So we don't do these things. Also in our research programs, perhaps with the exception of some of the infectious disease epidemiology groups, we have not much focus on the research. There are exceptions to this. I think, for example, a program in the Robert Koch Institute here is an exception. There are some exceptions in the US, but by and large, we do not do descriptive epidemiology. Summary. Epidemiology, Hippocratic epidemiology, let me not be mistaken, has been wonderfully successful, I think, in finding causes of disease, in studying prognosis for patients and populations, and in action, in preventive and treatment activities. Really great, but not very good in this descriptive epidemiology, painting the big picture of disease, of populations. And therefore, perhaps I leave you with this question: is there a need for remedy? Brings me to one of my last slides. We serve in Hippocratic epidemiology patients and populations. We don't discriminate between clinical and community medicine. We serve both. And that is in an old aphorism in medicine, which is very often attributed to William Osler, but it's older than that, I think, is we sometimes cure. We often relieve, but we always comfort. With that, I would like to thank all my collaborators over many years for the work that I could present here now and the work they have done. I thank again the American Academy for giving me the opportunity to be here as a fellow and to give this talk. I thank, and I forgot it last time, so I thank my family. Maite Suarez, Flori, Carmela. Thank you very much. And I thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you very much. Now, I have been told that I organize my own Q&A. Dan, is that the case? Shall we do that? Yes. Is there a question, a comment, perhaps a suggestion or a criticism? Yes, please. Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Thank you very much for such a fascinating and broad talk. It was really wonderful to hear this. I simply wanted to ask you to say a bit more about mechanisms and how they fit into the dramatic improvement in analytic epidemiology. Because if I understood correctly, and I may not have, it sounded like genomics and the reliance on genetic causes was an important part of linking RCTs to causes. And I guess my question is, does the identification of a gene automatically imply a mechanism, or can there be other mechanisms of disease that come from environmental factors that statisticians would consider confounding variables? So it's not really a technical question. Do we need a concept of mechanisms and a step-by-step explanation? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for that question. It's very interesting and a very difficult question, actually. First of all, I started, and I don't make it so long, but start off with the point that in order to prevent disease, and even in order generally to treat, or sometimes to treat, you do not need extensive, detailed mechanistic insights. You can, if you know, in the so-called black box, you can make the link, and then on the base, if you can make clear that this is a causal link, you can do something about that. That said, I think you will generally, we all will generally, as curious people, want to understand why it is then that these things happen. So, and in that sense, yes, I would think that what we have done in genomics and in the very broad field of genomics has led to particular hypotheses of mechanisms. But even there I have to disqualify this in some senses, because the fact that we looked at plaques and tangles in the brain and tried to look at mechanisms there in 0.5% or less than 0.5% of the cases has put us on the wrong track. We know a little bit of the mechanism there, but it's not very relevant for, 99.9 or so percent of the population. So yes, from a curiosity viewpoint and viewpoint of what we really want to understand this better, of course there's all need to look at mechanisms, and we do this in our basic science labs, but it's not necessary to help already now. Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Further questions? Yes, please. Yes.
Well, thank you very much for this great talk. I cannot agree more with you. I think you said it in between lines that there's one mistake probably that we did in epidemiology and maybe in public health. When I ask some people, so how do you define epidemiology and public health? They say, oh, it's something with health except medicine. So there's a disconnection between medicine and community health, epidemiology, public health, which I think is the biggest mistake. Yeah. The other piece is like you showed a picture of Alice Alzheimer and the other colleagues with basic scientists. We're not talking to basic scientists because we believe that's not our field. Well, it is our field, both understanding and providing insights from our field to them and jointly finding solutions. Yeah. And the other thing is the descriptive part. I think I cannot underscore more. Often finding like, oh, it's just descriptive. That's not enough for a master thesis. No, I think it's very important to have good descriptive studies. And I'm very happy in 2 days I'm in Vienna, and I will hand out the Austrian prize for epidemiology for a purely descriptive study. So good. Thank you for your talk.
Thank you very much. Very kind. Yes. Oh, yes.
Thank you for a great talk, and my question is a little bit in the same direction. So what do you think about the funding mechanisms we have, the competitive funding mechanisms? So if you apply with the purely descriptive application, probably you don't win it because everybody wants to see something analytical.
There are many differences between the US funding mechanisms and the European funding mechanisms, but this is the same on both sides. Yeah. No, I agree with you. This is one of the problem. You have proposal requests, and the proposal request generally starts off with this is a big problem, and now this is the detail we want you to study. And it would be wonderful when, say, in my case, the NIH would say this is a big problem, study it, and then we would get into this, I think. Okay. Yeah, I'm behind you also, but later, yeah.
Thank you very much, Bert. That was incredibly illuminating. But I want to ask you to drill down a bit more on descriptive epidemiology. There may have been a plaque or two or miswiring that I didn't quite get it. Is the criticism of or the description of the lack of descriptive epidemiology a failure of public health surveillance, or is it relatedly a failure to be able to identify new things like obesity as a public health problem when you didn't have that sort of Kantian category beforehand?
Both. It is both not seeing it on a sufficiently early on a population level, it takes time, and not talk to the people who see it, say in a clinical, as you said earlier, in a clinical context, in a hospital, you see earlier everybody, I had even in medical school the link between obesity, many years ago, obesity and diabetes. So it's well known, it's just that the link is not there, and also the studies are not there. The studies that really look in a good way, which is, by the way, difficult to find the burden of disease, how big a particular problem is not easy because you have all the problems of bias in early prevalence studies. It looks one of the most simplest way to do it. It's one of the most difficult things to do, and that is part of it, of the explanation as well, why we have not done this, I think, or not done this well. I think the back now, yeah. Julian distributes, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Albert. Excellent talk, and fantastic to learn that it was a German Oberarzt called Weinberg.
Absolutely.
Started the population health cohort studies movement.
Can I add a little bit to that?
1913.
Yeah, and then you come with your question. We always talk about in genomics, in population genomics, about the Hardy-Weinberg disequilibrium. This is a way in looking at population stratification and see whether it's not there, you can study it. Hardy was the most celebrated mathematician of his time in Cambridge. You cannot get higher. Wilhelm Weinberg, may I say this, like myself, a simple internist. And I always thought, oh my God, there is hope for all of us. Huh? The combination, because independently they found this, yes. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So I would love to hear from you with your deep and long experience. What is the future of epidemiology? There's so much happening, and you mentioned the causal revolution. It has only very patchily arrived in epi. And we can do so much more. Regression discontinuity in medical epidemiology, nearly everything where we make binary decisions in medicine lends itself to a wonderful RDD opportunity, and hardly anyone is doing it. Two-way fixed effects should be a standard. They are not. So there is the causal, there is the appearance now in our population-based cohorts and clinical cohorts of sensors, variables, and detailed information that we've never seen. It's big data, but what does it mean? It's extremely precise, structured data about our sleep patterns, our dietary patterns. So I think we'll see a revolution of precision in the future, and understanding deeply. It's not maybe the length of sleep, but how you sleep, how many times you wake up, and when. And then finally, should we consider doing much more marriage between our experimental colleagues, the trialists, and big cohort epidemiologists, and do trials within cohorts, routinely just randomizing, light touch, small interventions. But these are just a few ideas. I would like to hear your thoughts. Where is epidemiology heading in an era where the opportunities for new insights, I think, are massively expanding right now at this moment?
I think there's a really bright future. And it stands or falls with good data. Data, it's themselves, I think, is not enough. It's good data. And we get gradually now also in our electronic health records and the way we collect data on very large, good data sets. We have not many of them. So the cohorts have played that role. So I think it is likely that when we go into the big data era, we will profit from that. One of the issues we have, of course, but it's in many fields, is that we have to compete for the best of minds with, in this case, in AI and so on, and the methods development with the big pockets of the Googles and so on. And that's not so easy, although we have vocational colleagues who do this. And so if we go on and develop a cadre of people who work in this area, I'm quite sure it will be very, very successful in epidemiology as well. And no, I don't want clinical trials in cohorts because it disturbs the cohort. Good, we do that, yeah. Please.
Well, it's a very interesting talk, but I would like to challenge you. You
That's
say,
wonderful.
what you're saying is that epidemiology focuses too much on analytic epidemiology and less on descriptive. Isn't it more a matter of trust into descriptive data, particularly trust from a public policy point of view? I'll give you two examples. Cardiovascular disorders, think about the Finnish experience in the 70s when Finland was sky high. Yeah. They trusted the descriptive data and they implemented preventive methods and they went down rapidly. A great role model. Think about the pandemics. I remember very well already in March 20, the descriptive data from Chinese were very clear and very convincing in terms of this extreme age dependency of case fatality and comorbidity. However, there was just no trust in these data, no trust in translating that into public policy and prevention, high risk, very sincere high risk prevention, rather than generalized lockdowns. So I think it's not a matter of lack of data, it's a matter of lack of trust in data.
Okay. The second example I cannot judge, so I will refrain from talking about the pandemic and China example. The first I think I can, I'm in cardiovascular disease, so where it starts, the really great performance of Finland is with the so-called 7-country study of Ansel Keys in Minneapolis. This is obviously, as I said, 7 countries. You compare, you look at countries where there are very big differences in heart disease, and Finland was one of them. In fact, Ansel Keys, when he compared it, for example, with Japan, he went to Finland, he said, I looked at this, in north of Kuopio, at this little county hospital, and there were 20 patients, and 19 had a heart attack, and one was bitten by a polar bear, and then they knew there was a heart. Makes a joke. They knew there was a heart disease problem. So then it's, in a sense, that is a descriptive study. An ecological study is basically, in this case, 7 descriptive studies, but the emphasis and also the inference from this was on what came next, namely where is it related to and how can we study, in this case, in the case of Finland, cholesterol and lipids at large and perhaps also blood pressure. That is what made the Finns change their habits. So it is the analytic part that made, I think, the change there. Now it may well be that trust is, I know that trust is a very important part of science, and I think we are in an era of a bit of trouble there. I hope it passes, and I'm not so confident, particularly perhaps not in the US, but we'll see. Yeah. Yes.
Everybody say, or several say that was a great talk, but I will not ask you about details about what you said. One curve which for me was very disturbing, because thinking for the future is where it's going to end at the life expectancy, because we all want the best, the medicine, of course, the environment, Friday our future is great, and we want the temperature down, but the curve will go up.
In life expectancy, you mean?
Not for us maybe, but maybe in 100, 200 years. Yes. We will have only 90, most of the population, because the expectation that the population won't go up that quickly anymore. So that means we will have maybe 50, 60% of the people which are 90 years old, no license anymore, because, and all this, so what will be?
Yes. I think I see as the main problem for both individuals and populations the sorrow and the trouble that you have at the end of life. If we can prevent, which basically is a misnomer, it's postponing the really awful disease like Alzheimer's. If we can postpone that so that you can die in a decent way, for example, by a heart attack. Yeah? then it's fine. So it is, in that sense, the quality of life. But also remember, as a colleague of mine always says, quality of life is dependent on life. I mean, you first have to have life, and then you can talk about the quality. So I think I'm not so worried about this going up. I think our societies will manage some earlier and better than others. I know that Dr. Lauterbach's main concern, actually, from also a cost point of view, is the aging of the population and what you will see there. I know that is the major concern in the ministry. I know it also in China. I mean, if there is one country, and perhaps also India, if there's one country that has an issue in this, it is the People's Republic of China, where they are really working on this. But they have to restructure a whole population or whole society, so to speak, to deal with this. So I underscore what you say. It is an issue, but as long as we can, remove the trouble at the end of life, then we will manage, I think, to live happily then as well. Too optimistic? Perhaps. Yes, please.
I like to catch up to the question of the previous speaker, to trust in data and trust in descriptive data. And I wonder if part of whether we trust or distrust data and how much the public trust or distrust in data we provide them is how much we are able to deal with probabilities, so with risk information coming from scientific studies, and also how much we are able to explain them transparently to the public.
Yes.
So if we do not do so, we may lose trust.
Yes.
And a number of studies show that, not probably surprisingly, many patients and citizens have problems to deal with risk information, but also, interestingly, a considerable number of clinicians and doctors. So how much education actually is part of all this?
I appreciate very much that question. I can bring it into a very specific context. We talk generally in absolute risk for disease, also in relative risk, that's even more complicated, but in absolute risk. What is my risk, say, in the coming 5 years to have a heart attack? I know what I think I can interpret that. I can interpret the fact that if I smoke and stop smoking, what happens to my absolute risk. But you, I think, have to be numerical to think in these terms of risk. I have so often heard patients, when I did my own in the treatment, patient ask when I said, well, your risk is harder, it's, 25% of a heart attack, and they would say, that's strange. You either have a heart attack or not. See that. And so this is coming to your point, namely, we are not doing very well in this. I will also again blame particularly perhaps epidemiology. We're not doing very well in that explanation to a non-numerical population, which is, I don't know, this is a bit like this, is probably 75% or so. To translate those findings in a way that is not only trustworthy, but also convincing to them, so that it means, I know what to do on that basis. Perhaps we could do a better job. Whether general education is a solution there, and say, we all throw all problems that we have, we throw it to the schools. Huh? You resolve it for us and so on. I don't think that's the solution. I don't know what the solution is well, but I think to put it there, I don't think it will help very much. What do you think?
Well, I think not only to the schools, mainly probably we should start at both sides, medical schools and continuous medical
schools, certainly.
Of course, also we should start at schools with children. If they learn to deal with numbers and risks and probabilities, with uncertainty, I think that is a crucial point. Then we just grow up a new generation who can better deal with risk and uncertainty. But medical schools are also a perfect place. At the Charité, we have curricula for training on risk communication and dealing with such uncertainty information. And I think it should probably become more common to prepare future generations of physicians and epidemiologists, although they are the same for me somehow.
They are generally, yeah.
To explain their numbers and also make sense by themselves out of the numbers.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your talk. I really appreciated seeing causal inference all over this talk. And I know that at the Harvard School of Public Health, that's probably not so surprising, but in the German context, it sometimes can be. So as an epidemiologist who works on causal inference myself, I feel like I always have to justify this even within my field, why I'm focusing, why I do this type of methodology. I think description's absolutely important and undervalued, as you mentioned. But I think a lot of the efforts in Germany have been focused on risk prediction specifically. I think there's a nice interplay sometimes, as you mentioned, causes are excellent, predictors, actually.
Yeah.
But getting at the methods, getting at those causes in light of the law changes that are happening in Germany, where more patient data will become available also to researchers, how important do you think it is to strengthen causal inference methodology in Germany specifically moving forward in the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, this sounds a bit like an oratio pro domo, but I first, of course, agree with you very much. Yes, this is a very, very important topic, and not only in Germany, of course. In fact, in Europe at large, I think, and also in the US, obviously. I mean, Harvard is we have a bit of a group that works on this, but then there are other groups, obviously, as well. A very important topic, yes. As I said, we need to know whether the correlation is causal, because otherwise you cannot work with that. Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you. And as others have said, it's really interesting to hear the kind of short shrift given to the descriptive analysis. And you showed one chart from, I think, of the New York Times. And can you talk about the way in which this gap is being filled by the kind of new breed of data journalists? And what's the relationship between that and epidemiologists? How do they approach the problem differently? And does this make it perhaps less critical that epidemiologists are doing this work if major media outlets are doing this themselves now?
Yes. I always say in an introductory course when you talk about incidence and prevalence, I explain what it is: existing cases, prevalence, incidence, new cases of disease, and then I say generally journalists, for one reason or another, even in the best of newspapers, for example the New York Times, they always, when they talk about prevalence, they mean incidence, and when they talk about incidence, they mean prevalence. It's very strange, but that said, that's the exception. I think in terms of presentation of data, it's the visualization. It is really remarkable what is in the modern journalism, science journalism, done. It's not my field at all, but I know it. There is a department, a whole department at our school and jointly with the medical school, in which journalists are educated and in which journalist works actually in this particular area, and I think that will grow very much. Further, I cannot say very much about this. I'm just always very impressed with what good newspapers and magazines and so on do on this. Yeah. Thank you for all your questions. Now we go to President. Great talk.